Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast, and it's fantastic to have you along with us, and fantastic to have our regular co-host along with me. Tim, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Joel.
Excellent. Second Best Rescue jumper is on.
Yes, yep.
Makes a regular appearance on this podcast.
This is my favourite jumper at the moment.
Very good. And Stu, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. Good to see you. Thanks for that raised eyebrows.
People can't see it online though because my eyebrows are white and it's sort of like they're invisible. So I raise my eyebrows and people think I'm just looking at them.
Oh, yeah, eyebrows are difficult to discern.
That's why it's good I have black glasses because otherwise my face has no distinguishing features.
I wouldn't say that's true.
Well, it's got a little bit of a grey goatee and white skin, white eyelashes, white, what do you call it, eyebrows.
What's the cultural heritage of that?
No chin.
Isn't it just Scottish and... Is it Scottish and English? Because your mum's got... Oh, yeah.
I did that Ancestry.com thing.
Yeah. I want to do that.
Half Viking?
Kind of 50% English, 45% Scottish.
Wow. Yep.
Norwegian.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Aryan Peninsula, 1%. I think everyone has that.
What's the Aryan Peninsula?
I don't know. I think the Aryan Peninsula is Spain.
Oh, is it?
My theory is, have you heard of the Spanish Armada?
Yes.
Well, the Spanish Armada attacked England under the reign of Queen Elizabeth I.
Yes.
And the English fleet set the Spanish fleet on fire, and then a storm came. And the poor Spanish who were trying to get back to Spain couldn't go back the direct route because of the storm. Oh. So those that survived the fire and the battle went all the way around Scotland and then all the way down to Ireland. And most of them didn't get past Ireland. They just got shipwrecked on all the coasts as they went around.
Oh, really?
I don't know if any of them got home, but there's a group of people in Ireland who are called the Black Irish, and they have very black hair and they have opposite features to me. And they think that's the Spanish guys that got shipwrecked on Ireland.
That's the influence.
And I've probably got a bit of Irish in me as well. But yeah, I think some of them probably landed in Scotland as well. So I think part of the DNA of the British Isles has got a little bit of Iberian Peninsula. That's my theory.
I thought you said the Aryan Peninsula, but Iberian.
I might have said Aryan. Did I say Aryan?
You did. That's what I've been looking up, and the Aryan Peninsula is not the same.
That's not going to be
What's the Aryan Peninsula?
Somewhere down in India. So it's like, no, I don't think that's correct.
I've heard of the Iberian Peninsula.
That'd be interesting, wouldn't it, if I have a bit of Indian in me?
Yeah.
Hey, there it is. Iberian Peninsula.
My grandfather went to India after the war with the RAF for independence, for Indian independence.
Oh, okay.
He was very proud of that. He was in the Dam Buster Squadron, the ground crew.
Really?
He cracked an egg on a Spitfire wing in the 38-degree heat in India and it cooked it up. He was quite proud of that.
Wow.
I digress.
That was a good digression, though, I think. But to bring you back on track, Tim.
Yes.
You have a forthcoming book.
I do have a forthcoming book.
Can you name it for us? And then it's going to be really good to help us underpin what we're talking about today, because we're going to talk about young people at church.
Yep.
And we're going to talk, like we did with our Meals mini-series, we're going to do a mini-series on this, on theology, strategy, practice. We're starting with theology of young people. And couldn't be a better place to start than your actual book.
Yes. So the book is called The Child in God's Church. So it's coming out through YouthWorks Media. It'll probably, we're hoping that it'll be out sort of towards the end of January.
All good bookstores.
In all good bookstores, everywhere good books are sold. I've got no idea.
We could buy copies and put them in all the good bookstores.
We could, yeah.
On the shelf.
Just confuse their systems because it doesn't read the barcode correctly.
People will take it, go, there's only one left. We'll have to order more.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then creates that rarity, and then you can put the price up, Tim.
That's right, yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Exclusive items. Yes. So this is it's kind of the pulling together of a lot of different thinking from it's basically a mishmash of soul revival and YouthWorks and all the thinking I've done for the last.
So your life.
Yeah, it's my life.
This is your life.
It's the manifesto of Tim Beilhardt. So but the whole thing is actually designed around.
Tell me about your childhood.
Yeah. But there's a basic diagram which is the core of the book, which Stu and I drew 13 years ago, as we sat around his dining table thinking about how does children's ministry work at Soul Revival Church?
Yeah, wow.
And we thought about, what are we actually trying to do? How does it all kind of fit together? And so, we drew this little diagram that had the church in the middle, And then all these arrows showing that the church ministers to the child, the church ministers to the family unit, and the church ministers to intergenerational relationships. Right. And so that's essentially the core of the book, is when you think about putting a child in the church, so the child in God's church, what does the church therefore do to build discipleship for that child? So, and the three sections are basically, you have age specialist ministry, because we value that's still really key to have those peer group times, particularly for developing young people. So you can teach a 5-year-old the gospel in ways that 5-year-olds will understand, and not just put them in a sermon that's pitched at 35-year-olds and expect them just to either keep up or go to sleep. And we've talked before on the podcast about how important it is for teenagers to have their own space, to be peer, to be generative, to experience what it means to be Christians at their particular stage of life. So that's the first kind of key thing. Then it's young people are members of households, and so therefore a church will seek to minister to that household in all sorts of ways. You want to look after the parents, you want to help them, resource them with things that they can be doing, you want to walk alongside them, you want them to be doing discipling, and so that's sort of there's a whole field of family ministry that riffing off there. And then the other key bit, and this is key to our church and a key to a lot of the stuff I've done for YouthWorks over the last few years, is that young person is not just in age specialist ministries and not just members of families, but we want them to be integrated into the full church. And so this is the intergenerational piece. How do they actually be part of the body in such a way that they are both benefiting from a whole range of generations of discipleship, but also able to speak up into those relationships as well. So children's ministry, family ministry, and generational ministry. My argument is basically, we want to hold all three of those together, and a church will be doing well when it's doing all three. So that all came out of a diagram that Stu and I drew together. So
I was going to ask you, do you remember that fateful day where you drew it up?
We had fun.
We did. Had a lot of fun.
We were quite excited.
Yeah.
It was good. It was one of those moments you do remember.
Yeah.
A bit of a breakthrough.
I'm very proud of Tim.
Yeah.
He's very, very clear thinker. He's very intelligent, very godly, and he's very wise. So I think this book's going to be terrifically useful for people, and I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Yeah,
well, I've already read it, actually.
Oh.
I read it.
Have you?
He sent me a copy.
Oh, what do they call it? I forget what. There's a name for it, isn't it? You send out the book.
Oh, for endorsements.
Proof?
Oh, proof. Yeah, proof maybe.
A proof.
Yeah. Oh, well, it wasn't quite a proof copy. No, it was pre-edits. So
Pre-edit proof copy.
Yeah.
Pre-proof.
Pre-proof. Yeah.
I'm very proud of you, Tim.
But send around to a few people to.
Incredibly helpful and very clear and easy to digest and easy to apply.
Excellent. Awesome. I'll put that on the cover.
I think that's an endorsement. Yeah.
That's an endorsement. Yeah, I'll quote you.
Good. Yeah, I'll endorse it.
No, please do.
Oh, I'd love to see your name. Who it says the name on the book. Like, everyone should read this book.
I think I'll have to mention Batman somewhere though if I endorse it.
Yeah.
So maybe cut that little clip out of this thing, and then I might add to it something about Batman.
Yeah,
because
great.
Tim and I share a love of Batman as well.
I was listening to a podcast this week with a guy who's a graphic novelist, a Christian guy, and he has written a book called Batman is Jesus.
I think that's taking it another level.
Well, firstly, I can't believe I hadn't heard of this book before. And now I'm just really excited to read it.
Is he saying he's a Christ type or something?
I think that's the idea. Yeah.
Like they say, all our
typology of
Western stories kind of go back to the Bible.
I think that's the idea.
Like good versus evil and that kind of thing. Right.
So I'm excited about getting that book and reading it.
Right. Cool.
It's got me thinking.
There's a fair bit of digression in this podcast.
These people can see where I'm sitting because of my dark glasses and my hat, though.
It's just like a floating
dark
head.
background. This is because of my pale complexion. I actually had to get some skin cancer treatment this week.
Yeah, okay.
So, it was very hectic.
Yeah.
I'm full of skin cancers because I surf.
Well, it's not the surfing that does it, though. It's the sun.
Because you're 90% UK.
And the doctor said, he said, when are you people going to stop coming down here? And I said, excuse me. And
you came down here probably.
You Scottish people, you should just stay where you came from because this country, this climate's killing you.
Go back to where you came from.
I thought that was a little bit harsh.
It is a bit harsh. Wow. Okay, so you're recovering well from the skin cancer treatment, though?
I think so. Doing all right.
Okay, good. Let's we'll come back to the actual podcast, which is what is the Tim, and we'll start with Tim. Obviously,
Yes.
What does the Bible say about children and youth people? Youth people, young people, I should say. Sorry. Youth people.
That could be the new title for your book.
Oh,
Youth people in the Church of God.
Yeah, that's a podcast title.
Yeah, we've got the title for this podcast at least. Youth people. Use people. Yep.
Use people.
Young for children, doesn't it? Like you do in your book.
What does?
The Bible's teaching young people.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So the first the first thing theologically we can say about children and young people is that they're humans, which seems obvious. But when talking about that, what I mean is that they share in the same all humanity that all of us do, which means that they are created, so therefore precious. So you can riff on Genesis 1 and 2 there and say all of those things that are true of us because of our createdness, our image of Godness, all of that is really significant. They also share in our fallenness. So children, as well as being inherently a good part of God's creation, they are also inherently born into sin. And so they share in the common humanity of Adam. And then the third thing then is, of course, that they can also share in the common redemption of Jesus by putting their faith in him. And so therefore, when it comes to doing children's ministry, young people ministry, you want to honour who they are as image bearers of God. You want to recognise that they are fallen. So any sort of children's ministry or youth ministry that minimises sin or tries to downplay that will not be giving a full understanding of what it means and not helping them actually. If you play down their share in Adam's humanity and therefore Adam's judgment, you're not actually ministering to them the best way they know how. And of course, then the best way to minister to those who are sharing in Adam's sin and judgment is to offer them Jesus and to show them that they can also share in the salvation that Jesus wins. So just like we all sinned through Adam, all those who trust in Jesus can be saved, like Romans says. And so, I mean, that's the first thing that we can say, that the children are human and therefore they've got this theological story that they can be a part of.
And I think it seems, I think sometimes it seems like, I'm just thinking about how you said that it's important to have developmentally appropriate ways of teaching the Bible rather than just falling asleep or keeping up. So Leo, that's my son. Sorry, we're a bit all over the place today. But I was thinking about the poll that we put out, Stu, and asking, which all of 6 people voted in, but one of the questions was what to do when young people move away from church. Is the same things that Tim's talking about their theological perspectives and background, being a youth minister, is that the same thing that we kind of use as a basis to start looking at youth ministry as well?
I think it's a really good starting point. I think one of the things that we can tend to do with youth is we can tend to focus in on the negatives of youth culture or just the positives of youth culture. But I think what Tim's contribution brings is a healthy theological paradigm where we're looking at young people as human. And so human beings are going to, human beings have a sinful nature. And when a human being becomes a Christian, then they're fighting the fight of faith and they've been given a new nature by the Holy Spirit, but they've still got stuff to work on. So one of the things that I tend to feel quite strongly about is I don't like it when our culture demonizes young people because of some of their experimentation or some of their excesses, because they're still trying to work out what it is to be human and be Christian and to be who they are. And so I think being a teenager is one of the most exciting times of life. And so, yeah, there are particular problems with risk-taking, with sometimes teenagers come across as significantly selfish to adults. Sometimes they come across as quite proud and arrogant and pedantic. Sometimes they come across as too disconnected and not engaged. But all of those things are part of, the wiring up of who they are, particularly when they hit middle, high school, year 9 and 10. That's my favourite age group because teenagers are like, yeah, who am I? Everything's up for grabs. It's quite an exciting
question
time.
of identity.
Yeah, whereas and understandably, some parents will say, oh, I can't can't believe you like teenagers. I had one parent say to me once that, it'd be good if they could skip the teenage years and go from their kid being a kid to becoming an adult. And I think that completely misses the humanity of a teenager as well as a child. Yeah. Same with children, isn't it? Like some people talk about, I can't cope with toddlers because they're so full on or whatever. But, I talk to some people who they're 8-year-old boys. So it's almost like you've got to teach them to be a human again but apparently that's because their brains are completely being rewired at the age of 8 completely again. So you've got to be patient. You've got to be kind of saying, well, okay, I've taught my kid all this stuff up until the age of 8. Now I've got to teach him it all again because he's looking at it from a different perspective because his brain's changed. It's very exciting.
It also raises the question of why has God made us at those particular ages to actually be like developing quickly, and there's a lot going on. And I know I have some times with my son, I'm just like, he's 10. I'm like, why did you do that? But I'm like, I'm sure I did that.
Because you got to reteach him.
Yeah.
I told you that. I don't understand. Like even simple things. Like I taught my boys how to light a fire, and then I had to teach them again how to light a fire because they just didn't know how to do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, Tim? Like, do we miss the fact that God has made
a safe fire in a fire pit? Just so everybody realise, not a bushfire or a house fire, like an actual barbecue. Yeah,
a barbecue or in a campsite. What do you think about that idea of? Do we actually? I think we struggle, perhaps as adults, to go. We were like that as well, and why has God made children like that to be able to have to relearn things and.
Yeah. Oh, why? That's a good question. I mean, one of the things I love talking about is a God-given childishness. The young people are exactly who they are. Yeah. And I mean, one of the really difficult things when you're talking about any kind of human development and personality and those kinds of things is trying to tease out what is created and what is fallen. And it's really difficult to do that. And particularly, we don't have any examples in the Bible to see what did childhood and adolescence look like if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten the fruit. They didn't raise a child to imperfect child and unfallen adolescent. What is unfallen adolescent? I don't think any of us know. But I think we can look in and we can be curious about the way that kids are learning and are growing. Recognise that there are things that are, bodily part of how we develop. I mean, it often comes up in children's ministry circles when we're talking about group management. I would love for my 6-year-old boys to sit there with their legs crossed, hands in their lap, mouths closed, eyes on me, smiling while I monologue at them for 30 minutes. That would suit my teaching style really well because I talk too much. It's not possible. Now, is that a fallenness thing? No, I don't think so. I think there's a createdness there. If that, natural energy that 6-year-olds have gets turned into I'm stealing this Matchbox car and hitting someone else over the head with it. Well, then now we've got this interaction, right? And there is natural testosterone and boyishness that comes into here. They may have been frustrated by external circumstances that I've pushed them beyond their concentration limit, but there's also acting towards others in ways that are not godly, that are not peaceful, that are not loving, that are not self-controlled and generous and sharing in the way that, we know the fruits of the Spirit are. So, I mean, one of the things that's really fun about ministry is it is this complicated mess of trying to work out all of these kinds of things. I really like that about children's ministry, and I'm, adolescent ministry, youth ministry, you got those similar things as well, but just with adolescent-sized problems and not child-sized problems. I don't think I really have an answer to the why God has done that. But I think in terms of an awareness that is the case and that childness is not a deficit. I think that's really, really key for us to learn.
That's good.
That there's no deficit in being a child. They are not... and this is another key thing that I want to communicate is that children are fully human now. They're fully persons now. They are not developing. Sorry, they are developing, but they're not any less human when they're young. They're not any less of a person when they're young. They're not any less in the image of God when they're young, and they're not any less a Christian if they have faith, even if that faith is expressed at an appropriate 3-year-old level, 10-year-old level, 16-year-old level. So we're not fully image of God when we, reach 18 or reach 25 when the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, or and I think sometimes we mistake this in children's ministry particularly, you probably see it sometimes in youth ministry as well, that we are waiting for them to reach adulthood or a particular moment, and therefore waiting for them to be fully Christian, to have fully formed faith. It's the typical story of, I grew up in a Christian household, but I really became a Christian when I became 16 or on youth camp. And that kind of frustrates me a bit. It was like, no, you were a 5-year-old Christian. And for some of them, I ministered to you. I could see that you were a 5-year-old Christian. Your 16-year-old Christian self on youth camp, you were going through a whole lot of psychosocial development, which means that there are new meanings being formed, there's new understanding being formed of what that means. But you did have faith. You had an appropriate faith when you were 3, 5, 10, and now at 16, you've got an appropriate 16-year-old faith as well. And so I just think some of our language around that sometimes implies that, children growing up in Christian homes aren't really Christians, because real Christianity, in air quotes, comes when they reach some sort of level of psychosocial development. And I just don't think that's the case. And I think that, that's one of the things I want to try to communicate really clearly.
Yeah, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, Stu, is around why it's almost like adolescence is a thing that kind of has come later, because there is no biblical example of that. And I love, Tim, how you're saying like childness is not a deficit. And I think it's the same with, Stu, you've already been saying that as adolescents, teenagers, that's not a deficit either. And and as I said, there's no real biblical example of that. Why do you think that's become more of a thing? And it's almost like we talk about professionalizing church. It's almost like professionalizing children a little bit, that they need to eventually grow up to be this certain person. But as even the Bible says, we're always growing in our faith and our maturity. Is it like an industrial revolution thing, as you talked about before?
I think it's industrialized relationships to a certain degree. I think if you look back before the Industrial Revolution, which the Bible was written to a time where children grew up in the family and the community, and then they became adults. So there was a coming of age, 13, 14. They were considered to have gone through their childhood. Now they were, adolescence is an industrialized phenomena. So my grandfather, even, who was born in the early 1920s, he went to school, and then he turned 13, he went into the factory.
Right.
So he was then an apprentice as a fitter and turner. And so his adult life started when he left primary school. We now have a situation where we have a delayed adulthood, because we now not only have primary school education, but we also have secondary school education. So there's like a postponement of that rite of passage of becoming an adult. So one of the interesting observations I have is watching young teenagers navigate that there's a sense that I'm not a child anymore, but I'm not an adult in our culture. Now, what's happened significantly in the postmodern era since the 1960s is there's been an extension of that adolescence to beyond high school. So I suppose there was a time where people would finish high school. Looking back only to my era, it was actually quite common for 3/4 of the class to leave in year 10 and then get a trade, and then only probably a quarter of us, maybe I'm exaggerating, but less people would go on to university. To stay in high school to year 11 and 12 meant you're on your way to wanting to go to university on the whole. That changed in Australia in the 1990s, where the Keating government decided to extend more incentives for people to go to university. So more and more people would stay on at high school till year 12. Some people say cynically he was doing that to lessen the unemployment rate, which was quite high at the time. But nevertheless, that was kind of part of a general cultural change that was taking place around the world anyway, that people tend to be taking on responsibility later and later. Now, if you add in the fact that housing is so expensive and more people are staying at home with their parents because they can't afford their own place. I got married at 22 and I think I had my own place by 26. So I bought my first house at 26, 27, at least 28. So while I was still in my 20s, I bought a house and it was worth $230,000. And I'm like, far out, that's a lot of money. How am I going to afford to pay that off? Yeah. Well, now houses in Sydney cost over $1 million. And so not only are young people staying with their families while they're at university, many young people staying with their families into older adulthood and even getting married and moving back in with mum and dad because they can't afford a place. So it's an interesting phenomenon that's taking place that in one level we're extending adolescence even further, but at another level, interestingly, that last thing I said, it's almost like going back to the pre-industrial age where family units, extended family units used to work together more closely. So I'm still watching that space because I don't really understand it. But what I do understand is in 1790, the way people lived in Europe and around the world in 1790 looked more like first century than it looks like 2024.
Yeah.
So the technological advancements between now and the last 200 plus years is so significant that people living 2,000 years ago lived in a more similar environment to people in 1790. So the teaching about children that we're going to look at now about how to bring up children was in the context of a village. So that's probably something we'll pick up again next week as we look at what's a strategy of ministry we could develop today.
Yeah, definitely. Do you want to add to that, Tim?
Yeah, no, the one thing I was thinking of was, and this has just come out of some recent reading I did. Jean Twenge or Twingy, I'm not quite sure how to say her last name.
I should also, in a previous episode, I called her Jean Twenge.
Oh, right. No, that's Jean.
That's completely
get
incorrect.
in touch with her and say,
sorry. I should anyway.
Especially Jean.
Yeah, I thought it was male. She's female.
But her, one of the interesting things about one of her books on Gen Z is that she talks about this development of the prefrontal cortex, and it doesn't develop until 25. But she kind of throws in a counter hypothesis, which is actually we didn't know this until relatively recently because we didn't have the imaging technology and the ability to study it until relatively recently. And again, one of these kind of unknowns, I don't know, and she says, honestly, I don't know, but she's curious, is actually the slow development of the prefrontal cortex till 25, which is your decision making largely. So your ability to, in common parlance, to adult, your ability to adult, isn't fully developed until 25. She's curious, goes, well, is that a symptom or a cause? So she wonders whether that has always been the case. Do you go back to pre-industrialized society, and if you did brain imaging on 18-year-olds then, would you see the same thing? Or would actually the fact that the society in which you grew up with forced you into adult decisions much, much earlier
as a result
will have actually shaped the growing of the brain? Now, again, we don't know. We can't know. And she says that we can't know. But it is wondering, it's the whole chicken egg thing. Like, are we having a delayed adolescence because, as we can now see, everyone through all of time and all of history has had prefrontal cortexes that slow adult development down to 25? Or is actually the slowing down of the prefrontal cortex a symptom of this extended adolescence that has been growing, from the Industrial Revolution, but certainly through the last 100 or so years with formalised schooling and all of those kinds of things. So, it's a curious thing to wonder about. I'm not sure how you would test it, but I think it's good to be thinking through. And it also, it impacts our ministry because we're thinking about how do we actually help people to be fully functioning persons at appropriate level. And I think that's really key as well. I mean, my wife and I, we always kind of jokingly but half seriously said, our purpose as parents is to develop fully functional adults. We want them to launch out of our family into life in a way that they actually know how to do life. And that's one of the key things that we've been, often saying we try and work towards. But the danger of that is that you actually miss the joy of each moment and each stage, and you actually forget that, no, this 8-year-old is not just frustrating because they're not acting like a 30-year-old. The 8-year-old is joyously expressing their God-given childishness. And God, for whatever reason, I don't know the why, but God has meant for 8-year-olds to kind of be like this. And so how do we best care for them, love them, help them to serve in the church, be served by the church, involve in intergenerational relationships as the 8-year-old that they are.
And then God asks us to see them as an example of how we should be. So
that's right. That's a really, really key point as well.
So rather than, I think a lot of parents think we need to help our kids to be like us, but the Bible teaches us to think about how can we be like them and have a childlike faith as well.
And I wonder if that might start to point towards a why is actually there is something that God wants us to learn from childhood, that there are ways in which they express life and ways that they express faith that we can learn from. And I think Jesus is using that idea of childhood and learning from childhood as an intentional way of saying, there are things about being a disciple of Jesus where you have to just submit. You have to recognize that you're not the powerful one in the relationship, that when Jesus says something that you go, okay, yes. Like, we've all had, little toddlers, and you tell them something, they go, okay, cool. And they just believe you straight off, or they'll do what you ask. And there's a sense, maybe that's a little bit of what Jesus hints at, that when he asks us to do something like a child, we just go, okay, daddy, yep, cool, big brother, yep, oh, cool, I'll just do that. There's a trust that comes through there. So, maybe part of the why is that there are things that we can be learning from childhood. And certainly Jesus applies it to faith. You cannot enter the kingdom of God unless you become like these.
That was a question I was going to ask, but you kind of answered already. But it's the idea of trust and how God does use children as a really great example of that. We need to trust him as a result. And so when you kind of have these moments, I'm thinking about now, it's not just, we've been talking about adolescence, but it's not just that now. There's tweens, and there's all these terms and labels that we are kind of dividing up childhood now to, or there's toddlers, and then there's 0 to 5, or there's primary school age and all those things. But it really is to trust him, isn't it? And being a father and seeing how my children learn is that how much they learn through play. Yes. So I was going to ask you this question is, I've seen a quote and I can't remember what it is, but if you want to teach a child something, you could do it through repetition 400 times or something. But if you did it through play, you could do it 10 times, and then it would be much easily bedded in. There's somebody called Jeremy Frisch who I follow about athletic development, and he's talking so much about that, saying that a lot of parents in America try and professionalize their children way too early.
Yeah.
And get them playing lots of sport, but then they've also got them doing adult style physical capacity exercises. So a lot of squatting and things like that. And he's like, no, you should be mimicking things like climbing trees and, mild risk-taking behavior where they learn movement patterns and hopping and jumping and all those kind of things. So I suppose my question is, and I suppose, Stu, you can go first on this one if you like. Where do you think the concept of play comes into how we can respond biblically to children and teenagers? Have any idea about that? Or is that a tough question?
It's a clever question. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's play is about putting things into practice and learning through practically doing, and also taking a concept or a principle and exploring it. I think that's how I would describe play. So I remember when I was little, and my dad and my uncle, one of my most fond memories actually comes back to Batman too. One of my fond memories was one weekend, Uncle John and Dad said, we're building a treehouse for you two boys. And so we gathered up a whole heap of lumber and we went down to the back block that we had at our house where there was a big old gum tree, and we climbed up into the gum tree and started building a treehouse together. And Greg and I, my brother and I, were allowed to help, and we nailed things and screwed things and lifted, and sword things in age-appropriate ways. Well, I think I was 10 and he was 8, or 8 and 6 or something like that. And anyway, we made this little rope ladder and we climbed up into this platform, and there was the first day was just a platform with some lumber kind of around, like a bit of a fence so we couldn't fall out. It wasn't that high off the ground, but I don't think I've ever felt more free in my life. There was a little trap door. We climbed up in there. We sat there, and Greg said, "Let's dress up like Batman and Robin." We sat in the tree, and there was an interesting interaction there between the adults and the kids where we did that together, and then we were then left to explore that space that was created for us by our parents. And I think as I read in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, I think I'm really struck by the role of adults in helping young people to be pointed to God and experience God is actually a really big theme in the Bible. So in Psalm 127, 3-5, children are described as a heritage from the Lord, and they're a blessing and they have great value. So I think by doing something with us, we experienced my uncle and my dad seeing us having value, that they wanted to do something that from an adult point of view had no meaning, really, building a treehouse. But that became our back cave, even though it was in a tree. But we were really valued. And, Proverbs 22:6 says, parents to encourage and train up children in the way they should go, emphasising the importance of the guidance there. So we should train up our children on we should point them to God and how to actually understand him and have a relationship with him and how to live that out. And so I think we need to have teaching spaces, but we also need to have practical spaces where we can play as young children, because that's how we learn to interact with each other and the world. And funnily enough, that's how we learn how to be a disciple, because not only is there the obvious things of as you said earlier, don't hit the other kid on the head with a matchbox car or whatever. But how do you work through disputes? That treehouse, we ended up finishing it, and there was a house behind our house, and there were some teenage boys. And one day they walked up the driveway, and Greg and I were standing on the top of this little platform with our hands on our hips like Batman and Robin, dressed in full Batman and Robin gear. And one of the teenagers yelled out, "Oh, it's Batman and Robin." And we just looked and stared at them, and then they started teasing us, but we were so in character, it was like we didn't care. Like we were just like, and that sort of in a way made us really excited, because these teenagers had sort of recognised the identity that we were vibing, and we ended up getting out of the bat tree and running around, just that's how we express as kids. But, there's all sorts of, I think, theological consequences of living out what we learn, because when we put it into practice, we actually understand it in a deeper way. And I think for kids, play is that.
Yeah. Tim, do you want to have a go and play as well?
Yeah, there's a whole world of literature out there on the importance of play, which I'm not familiar with at all. I'm just familiar that it exists out there. But one of my favourite stories, I did do some research on Lev Vygotsky, who was a child developmentalist in Russia in the 30s and 40s. And one of my favourite stories of his writings is he's talking about these two sisters who are playing a game called Sisters. And in the game, they are acting towards each other in what they understand in their imagination is the perfect way to be sisters. Right. And what he's noticing is that they're playing a game which makes them play a hyper-realised version of what is actually true of them. And when they stop playing the game, they then just interact as sisters. But the play has helped them to learn how to actually do reality. And so, like Stu and Greg being Batman and Robin, standing up to bullies because they're fully in character, like children are learning through play how to put on morals and values and character that you actually want them to do. And again, there's a God-givenness there that, actually learn through play. And one of the ways that I'll kind of use that is thinking about how we do children's ministry at church, and even actually the whole thing about church, I see it as like we're playing at being Christians when we come to church, in that Vygotsky kind of way. As in, like, we come to church and I play being the best possible version of Christian that I can think of. Like, I sing, I pray, I listen to the sermon, I do the Lord's Supper. We have positive conversations with each other, and I'm playing at being Christians in the same way that those sisters were playing the game of being sisters, in that it's not that it's not true of me, it's just that when I'm in that corporate space, hanging out with other Christians, I'm hyper aware of what actually a character of a Christian should be, the types of behaviours and practices that a Christian does, and I'm doing that in amongst corporate others, which I think will then help me to continue in those things when I've stopped playing at being Christian at church and I go out into my week. But actually the play has helped me, in my regular week to know, that's right, like I should be more like this. I should be, I should be thinking more about praising God in my everyday life, not just when I'm at church in this, particular moment. And so for young children, like one of the things I don't do enough of, but I really like it when I do, is when you're thinking about application for teaching in kids ministry, is to get them to play out scenarios. Like, if this is true, all right, like one of the ones I can stick firmest in my mind was we were doing 1 Corinthians and the not eating meat that's been sacrificed to idols. So we're doing this with primary school kids. But the big idea that I tried to draw out of it was that there are good things that we can give up in order to love others. And so then I gave them some scenarios. I said, I put the boys in a couple of groups and said, all right, I want you to play out, you are playing at church and your favourite game is chess. And you're playing chess with each other, and a third person, and this other kid, you're the third kid that walks up and watches them play. I want you to think about what it would look like to put off a thing that you love in order to love others. What would that look like? Go for it. And that's all the guidance I gave them. Some of the girls, I said, okay, you're going to play, your scenario is you've gone around to someone's house and it's your birthday. One girl, it's your birthday. You've got people around your house and you're really excited about showing this movie to your friends, but it's PG. One of the girls who you've invited says, in my family, I'm only allowed to watch G-rated movies. What would you do? Go. And so in both scenarios, actually what they picked up really well, because we looked at 1 Corinthians together, was the boys said, we could invite him to come and play chess. Actually, what if we went and put away chess and we went and played a different game that 3 people could play? What if we played handball instead and all 3 could be involved? Wow. I said, this is it. They're playing with this idea, but they're coming up with an application of, it's totally fine to play chess, but if you're playing chess excludes someone else from being part of your group, it's okay to put chess aside and go and do something else. And the girls, again, came up with a scenario, which I assumed that they would, which was, that's okay. I can not show you my favourite film that's PG. Let's go and find another one that everyone here can watch so this other girl doesn't have to sin against her family values. So that's the kind of stuff, like in terms of actually, how do we actually apply all of this, particularly in children's or youth ministry, like give them scenarios, help them to act it out, help them to play out application.
That's really cool.
Because they're the kinds of things that they'll actually be learning. And I mean, it stuck in my head as a teacher as I was watching them. I don't know if it stuck more in their head, but they're the kind of things we're playing together in what it means to be Christian, so that when it actually comes to being Christian in real life, outside of the kids ministry walls, outside of the church building, we've actually strengthened our muscles, our character, our value, our fruits of the Spirit muscles, so that when we go out in the real world, we're more reflexively going to act in those kind of ways.
Just discipling. It's like she was saying
that's
earlier.
Exactly right.
Yeah, you're using play to help disciple one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's real. And then as a result, as we've talked about before, going on mission outside of church as well.
And it's applying the Bible to all of life. Like Deuteronomy 6:6-7 says, these are the commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit down at home and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up.
Yeah.
So I think we can compartmentalize church a little bit and think we've we're bringing up our kids to be Christian by taking them to kids' church or Sunday school or kids' program at the local church. But actually it's like in the midst of their play, how do they apply the Bible? So maybe we need to play with them and show them how to do these things. But interesting, I was listening to you say that and I was thinking, I think a lot of us adults need to learn how to do that. Because an adult comes along who's not interested in talking about politics in the middle of a political conversation at church. It's okay to stop that conversation and talk about gardening or something that they're interested in.
Yeah.
We're not always good at that, are we?
Well, we're not. And sometimes, like, I mean, I don't know if you guys have been in a training where you kind of, like as adults, where you role play different scenarios, and it always feels really daggy because it's just like, this is stupid, we're adults. But there is a little bit of truth in it, in that like you can role play ideas and you're role playing different types of conversations and those kinds of things. I don't know if there's a less daggy way of doing it, but that's exactly right. It's let's practice having these kinds of conversations. And maybe it's just, actually, this is jumping off something that our young adult late night team has been thinking about recently. They made it a commitment, I think it was last term, to make prayer a really key part of their focus for that term. And one of the things that they gave themselves a challenge was, as you're talking with people during the night, try and pray with one other person, like in that moment at that time. And what they noticed was exactly what Stu just mentioned, that they actually, because it was on their mind, they were conscious of having a conversation and finishing a conversation with prayer. And so the whole late night team just started very slowly changing the culture of, over late night, as you're having frivolous conversations with each other, just finishing it with prayer and just saying, hey, can I pray with you about that right now? And that, again, helps us to have those kinds of discipleship relationships. So I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And I think as we come to kind of the end of this episode, like starting to wrap it up in a sense of what we'll talk about in our next episode, which is a strategy of how to make that happen at church and what we're doing. So we could even use the three kind of main sections of your book that you're talking about. So you talked about children's ministry.
The spheres of discipleship.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the spheres of discipleship next week.
Sounds great.
Hold on to your hats. Goodness me. But also family ministry and intergenerational ministry. Three main areas that we love to talk about when it comes to youth people, as I called them before, but young people and children. Any final words, Stu, to wrap up the episode?
Yeah, I just love the consistency in the Old Testament and the New Testament towards children. They're the church of today, they're not the church of tomorrow. And we're passing on to them the things that we've learnt that have been passed on to us. And there is an amount of effort that goes into that. And I think there's a responsibility on adults to see young people as young disciples, that we're discipling them. They're not just annoying and need to be, that they're noisy and they're...
Wait till they get older.
To disciple them.
Yeah.
But, I love the conversation today about play, because we can disciple young people as we play with them and teach them principles from God's word as we play. And we can maybe cruise around with teenagers. I mean, one last story I'd love to leave with us today is people often think teenage boys don't talk very much. And anyway, when my two boys were old enough to go to high school, my dad, we live in a house together with my parents. They have their own section separate to ours, but we kind of have an intergenerational kind of household, which is really connected. It's really lovely. So my dad actually offered to drive first Ethan and then Elijah through high school, drive them to school every morning, and often pick them up too. He's very generous. And it only takes 5 minutes to drive to school. And anyway, the feedback from my boys about going with Grandpa in the car every morning was they would just sit there and Grandpa would tell them stories, and they'd just learn all these,
because he's got a few.
And they'd make a joke, oh, Grandpa loves telling stories. And anyway, I talked to my dad about it, and I said, years later, after now both Ethan and Elijah have gone through high school, Dad's basically spent 6 years driving Ethan to school every day. And then Ethan and Elijah 6 years apart. So he's also spent another 6 years driving Elijah. So it's almost 12 years that he's been driving the boys to school. And I said, I was just having a cup of tea with him one day, and I said, oh, Dad, I read this thing that apparently teenage boys don't like sitting down to talk to someone else by sitting across a table from them. Or they don't like just sitting and talking. They like to be moving and sitting beside someone and talk. And my dad said, "Why do you think I drove your boys to school every day for the last 12 years?" And it makes me cry actually.
It's awesome.
Dad didn't know that research, but he knew it.
He knew it would work.
He knew it would work. Yeah,
he knew that those
great.
boys just wanted to be quiet and listen. They didn't want to sit down at a table with him and have a cup of tea. So he wasn't thinking of himself, what he'd like to do.
Yeah.
He thought, I can actually spend time with my grandsons for 5 minutes because that's all they've got.
Yeah.
And then they lose concentration. I drive them to school. We have a chat. And then increasingly over the time,
That develops.
they
more,
talk
doesn't
to
it?
him as well as and they share their life with each other.
Yeah.
And both of them, when they got their P's, wanted to take their grandfather for a drive.
Oh, that's
awesome.
cool.
So sorry I cried there a bit.
No, it's
but
all
I
right.
didn't expect to do
It's
that.
so
But that's
impactful, right?
Yeah,
Like, it's
that's
just
the
massive.
along the way, you know. And I think that's really beautiful.
Well, I think I even remember, like with my mates at school, we didn't want to sit around and talk, but we'd like sit and play PlayStation, looking at the
that's
screen.
a
But
great
we were like
example
all
of it,
just
wasn't
like
it?
hassling each other, but that's how we were developing our social
Yeah.
as well.
So
And you notice that even in those moments, like even when you're playing PlayStation, those like you spend enough time with your mates, and every now and then something deeper will come up,
Yes,
and you'll have a more serious conversation in the midst of playing, and you can be lighthearted and serious and joke around with those kinds of things at the same time, and here we are, three blokes. I'm not sure if it's just a stereotype, but I think that's a way that blokes do kind of interact with. There is that
side by side,
but also that mixture of playfulness and banter and seriousness all mixed into one. And again, it's not a deficit. It's actually a great way that we can include that. Whereas and again, coming back to youth and children's ministry, sitting around a circle, all looking each other in the eyes and saying, how is Jesus helping you to be a disciple this week?
it's a bit threatening.
There are maybe a small number of young people that
girls
might work
like
for.
that,
Well, I don't know. I mean, we might have to bring Fee and Anna on to have a conversation about that.
That'd be a great idea, actually.
But I know I've watched it. I've watched myself do this, and I've watched others do it, and I just go, that doesn't really work, does it? And I've told this story before, but there was a small group at another church that I went to visit, and they did exactly that. These two teenage leaders are trying to lead a group of Year 5 boys on answering the application questions from the talk, and it was like pulling hen's teeth. It was terrible, and they did an admirable job, but it was just the wrong context. As soon as it was over, those leaders went and helped the rest of their team pack up. And because it wasn't my church, I was just there to observe. I just ended up playing handball with these 5 boys. I got so much out of them because we're smacking the handball around. I'm asking about their life and their family and their school and what they enjoy and what they don't enjoy, how long they've been coming to the church, all these kind of things. But it was such a different way of, it was such a different environment. We're not just sitting in a circle asking questions, but actually doing something active, which made the massive difference.
I think that circle that we have in so many of our Christian contexts where we sit around a circle is actually a really ancient practice where people used to sit around a fire and talk.
Oh, yeah.
But we've taken the fire out and we still have the circle. And it's a great example of how industrialisation can strip away something that's really human, because we can watch a fire, we can poke the fire and we can get wood, put it on the fire, and it just creates...
There's still an activity.
That we can talk through. But you take the fire away and everyone just sits around a circle. We've still got the circle, but we don't have the fire. So,
and you think that
on our men's group on Tuesday nights, I'm doing it around the fire, and there's really long pauses as people think stuff. And then someone will say something. And the other thing is, in a Bible study where you sit around a circle, it's annoying when someone goes on for ages. But if there's a fire, it's not annoying. You just sit there and, okay, that dude's thinking that.
And you look at the fire, don't you?
Yeah. So that's another interesting thing about that.
Yeah. When pre-industrial age, we would have done that a lot more, like you said. But also, it's even when the side-by-side thing of learning new skills and the apprenticeship of making boots and being a blacksmith.
That's
and
exactly
those kind
right.
of things too.
That's exactly right. And you look at the devolution, like you used to have a fire, then you had to have a fireplace in a house, and then you'd have the radio, and everyone in the family would sit around the radio. Then everyone would sit around the TV. But now everyone has devices and everyone goes off and does their own thing. So bringing people back around in a circle is a bit like, what is this? There's like a cultural memory of it, but we don't really know why we do that anymore.
And it speaks to those things we've talked about today of like, why has God made us the way we are at whatever age? But then those elements of play and stuff too, and how do we look at that biblically, I think is really a key way to think. Yeah, there's a lot there. Anyway, we'll wrap this episode up. But thank you guys. It's been really, I always really appreciate your conversations. If you do have anything to contribute, email me at joel@shockersilver.com.au and we'll get back to you. And if you want to chuck a comment on our YouTube channel, that'd be amazing. And having said that, thank you again for listening and watching. And thank you to Stu and Tim. It's been great. We'll finish with one way.
One way.